Thank you.
Okay, so at 7:35, I will call this meeting, this regular meeting of the RTM Education Committee to order. With respect to our agenda, we don't have any minutes to approve tonight. There may be minutes that need to be approved, but that will be at a subsequent meeting. So there's two things we're going to discuss tonight: the approval of the Darien High School track, and then the Board of Education operating capital budget. Now, with respect to the track, with the RTM, we'll be voting on that on Monday. I will be out of town, so Wise, hopefully you can give the report on that to the extent we have to. I'm not sure if it will be us or finance budget. And then with respect to the operating capital budgets, look, you guys, the one of the things I would like to use this meeting for is just to make sure we've had a full discussion on that whole process, things we liked, didn't like. Because we will be preparing a report, which I will be reading at the RTM meeting when we approve it, and assuming we recommend approving it, we'll read that recommendation. You can share any of those comments tonight. You can also share comments with me by email, and that process will follow what we've done in the past, where I will draft something up, circulate it to members of the committee. They can send comments back because I'm ultimately presenting our kind of group report. And if somebody, if somebody wants to sort of air sort of specific comments, they can kind of do that as well. But I guess the point being is, like, we don't necessarily have to take a lot of time tonight hashing through some of the different aspects of the budget, unless you all want to. We can, just make sure we kind of incorporate this stuff later. Yes?
F&B is primary, as I heard on the Rules Committee, because it's already been bonded.
Excellent.
So
Okay.
it's already gone through. So here we are.
Good. The fact that I'm missing it.
And just a question, point of information, for when you said the approval that we're discussing tonight, you said at the Monday RTM meeting, do you mean the 27th meeting, or am I confused? And
I thought we had a meeting on Monday.
I just want to make sure I'm clear at the time, the date. It's on Monday, the 20th?
The 20th,
Okay, so I have it on my
yeah.
calendar wrong, so thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, I'll move to the track. The quote itself on the track, as well as memos circulated. Peter had raised a couple of questions today, which I had asked, which I forwarded to Dr. Adley, who also offered to come tonight if we needed him. I didn't think we would need him, so I said, they could stay at home. But he did respond with answers to these three questions, which I had sent back to Peter. But just in the interest of our full discussion, I wanted to read them tonight. And then Peter, if you want to comment further, please do. So the first comment was there's about a $2,000 discrepancy between the cost project per the February 7th memo and the resolution request. Why? And the answer is because the project is recommended to be bonded by the town. The cost of bonding is included in the resolution. So that would explain that difference. Next question, what is the quote-unquote life expectancy of the new track? How long should the new track be fully functional and intact? The life expectancy is 20 years and it includes a 6-year warranty. Then the third question was how long and what is the product and installation work guarantee by Cape and Island? The product's a polyurethane two-tone BES 300 sandwich system with a 6-year warranty. Perfect. Right, good answers, yeah.
You got that, Peter?
Did anyone else want to comment on the track, its enormous cost?
I'll just say the fact that it's already been approved, there's no room for us to discuss it.
I would agree with that.
And this process sort of broke down. It all got approved before it came to us.
I think even though it's approved, I think it's a good thing for the Education Committee to know what happened and in public
Yes,
say, this is a good thing.
I'm not sure on this, but had this had been approved last year or discussed last year and punted to this year? Because I seem to
I believe the
recall.
latter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, because I
okay.
seem to recall we discussed it, yeah, okay.
We did.
Anyone else?
No, I just think it makes sense, right? The school was built, when, 2005, right?
Yeah.
So that's 18 years, we're gonna get a new one. So, I'll fully support it. Regarding the process, if we can recommend not to do it, right? But,
Have we heard that a lot of people tripped on it and?
I had
I
gone,
have heard that, I have.
Okay,
People
well, I
run
mean, that's
there.
helpful.
people from town run there too, which is.
yeah, it gets a lot of use, that whole area gets a lot of
Right.
use. Yeah.
And also better to do it before it becomes unusable.
Yes,
Right.
okay. So with that, I'll move for a vote if there is
Need
a.
a motion.
Yeah, if there is a motion in support of, in support of the work on the DHS track. That's Ann. Is there a second? Peter? All in favor, please raise your hands. That's unanimous, thank you. The next topic is the operating and capital budget. I think those of us that brought our printouts, maybe I brought my old one, you brought the new one. Does anyone want to comment on that budget process, either operating or capital process or specific items, what should have been there, should not have been in there?
Sure, yeah, I have a bunch of comments, so stop me where we will want to discuss it and chip in. I always look at these budgets, both on sort of the outcome for the taxpayer as well as the process itself. So the outcome so far, 3.56%, I think that's an excellent outcome. I think the teacher's contract was critical, not only from fiscal side, but also for attracting new teachers, but also as a blueprint, we have three more contracts coming this year. So that's important. The services, we have additional services. We've reserved educational priorities, right? Class size stayed. I didn't hear any canceled classes. And we have a couple new initiatives, right? I mean, the security is obviously important. The mental health is important. I listened to the presentation by the chief, right, the new director of security, and when I hear that he wants to make this the safest, the best district in the country, I mean, that's music to my ear. So from outcome, I'm satisfied where it is. We'll see what Board of Finance does with it. Now, there's a couple things that obviously changed. The original budget was close to 5%, now it's 3.6%. So, between now and our vote, what I want to study or what I want to understand better, either, by reviewing some of the past stuff throughout the year that happened or for administration directly, is how these so-called cuts that happen during the process impact the functioning of the schools, right? Especially the building substitute teachers, the IT reorg, when there's a change, of have no director of technology, has been eliminated, and there's a new position added. These two specifically, I know they were discussed by the Board of Education, and I think they were smart of sort of keeping flexible attitude towards it. They say, listen, if this thing doesn't work early next year, it can come back to us. And I think that's a nice approach. And the third thing that I want to focus on, whether it's part of budget or not, is my understanding of this special ed. It's a quarter of our budget. It's a big item. From my understanding, we have more and more kids in high school became part of special ed. I don't think that's a good trend. When I
Well, if
hear,
you're gonna start when they're little, they're gonna end up in high school.
well, at some point, you would imagine they graduate, right? I mean, isn't
No.
the speech therapy and all this?
No, they can stay in high school until they're 22.
Yeah, they can, right? But we have 13% of our kids.
But I think, I don't know, I mean,
Yeah.
but part of Peter's point, like, the goal should not be for there to be a larger special ed population, right? Like
You can't dictate with your
I know
special
you
ed
can't,
population.
but are we doing something wrong?
We're doing a very good job, people move here.
I don't think we're doing something wrong. I just think that the diagnosis and the way that kids are now being supported in terms of like you have a reading difficulty, or you have dyslexia, or you have whatever you have. There's more diagnosis, there's more awareness, therefore you are finding more kids to be needing support and services, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's an issue that we're just growing the population, it's an issue that we are identifying these kids at an earlier age. We have more tools to identify these kids. I don't think the objective of DPS is to grow the special ed population of, either. But I do feel that there is more tools for everybody to identify that our kids are definitely, a lot of our kids are falling through the cracks, because now we have these, I don't know if tools is the right word, but screening to determine that these are kids that need special services.
Well, it's also been a move for kids who were outplaced in previous years to bring them into
Right.
the school
Because we're
system
doing a
because
good
it's
job.
more cost effective
Exactly.
for the
Right.
town to
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
So-
I'd like to make one point too, and that is when kids don't graduate from the program, if they're being supplied with services from, say, first grade on through, we can't expect that the problem will be solved, which is why you see the growth of special ed services in virtually every single college and university in this country, because they're taking kids, and just to go back on that, in 1988, it was very difficult to find colleges that provided special ed services. There were few and far between. Now they're everywhere, because we now know that students who are receiving special ed help, there's no reason why they can't go to and graduate from college.
Sure, of course,
So I think
100%.
we need to understand that this is not something, some kids may be able to leave the program, but under many of the diagnoses and treatments systems that kids are in, they're not going to be able to leave the program.
And let's just, clarify, many of you may know or not know, I am heavily involved in special education in Dearden. And two things I would say in response to your question, Peter. Number one, it's not really a program, right?
Right.
Students have
Right.
IEPs and they
Right.
receive specific services for their needs. And those needs are reviewed on a pretty frequent basis. So if kids are doing so well, they no longer need PT or no longer need the reading help, and then they do stop. They kind of move off of that.
Right.
So it's reviewed regularly, I guess, my
Good.
response is.
Yeah, I mean, we just talk about the outcome of this, right? So that's, for me, that's a homework to get smarter about it, because, when I talk to a teacher who says half of my students have some kind of special individual plans and I have to plan for all of them, it obviously affects, this. But I understand all these things. We just, it's a lot of money we spend. I just want them to, and I know there are rules about it, and I know state requirements, and of course we have to follow them, but
It's an important budget item, so we have to.
Yeah.
so
Yes.
that's one of the 3 or 4 things that, I want to sort of further understand. So that's my comments on the outcome, and I can stop there. I do have a bunch of comments on the process itself, which I found.
You know what, maybe can we come back to that?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, because
I had a different question on not on the process, on the outcome, because then I think this came up in a number of the calls that we did. But I raised the concern in one of the calls, knowing that inflation is running anywhere between 6 and 8%, and we're all excited about a 3.6% outcome, that means real declines in services delivered and in wages. So I wonder whether our competitiveness relative to other towns in Fairfield County has diminished as a result of this.
You mean for recruiting teachers?
Teachers, and to the point Peter made, there were cuts made to the plans that the administration wanted to implement, and I'm not exactly sure why that was done, why we're pushing so hard for some nominal number, recognizing that number is well below the rate of inflation.
Yeah, but for the teacher's contract, right, like, it's not, ultimately, I don't know if this is right or not, but like, the district negotiated a contract and then, they pay what's in the contract. The whole point of that is not, so whether it's competitive or not, like, they're now, I think, bound by the contract until the next, I guess time will tell if it's competitive, but they
Yes,
can't just
because-
arbitrarily.
Well, they admitted that, right? They
Yeah.
said that there's a chance that there's a couple of local schools coming up for
Yeah.
negotiating and it
Yeah,
may not be
and they'll leave
competitive,
folks,
but.
yeah.
And then, we had a ton of departures, which created a
Yeah.
lot of issues for the district, and I would just think when we push so hard to keep that number as low as we possibly can, for all the right reasons, I suppose, raises the risk, in my opinion. And then when I hear the things that Peter mentioned about cutting things that might be considered helpful services, that also concerns me.
So if I can, on the teachers, right, we made a lot of changes. The absolute number that we increased was like 3.5 to them, every year, right? But I think the first couple of grades, if you remember the negotiations, right, we increased it much more significantly. It was no percentage down, but it was the absolute number of dollars, right? And it drives, in my opinion, most of the budget, right? Obviously, the labor is 70% of the budget. So, and I think, and we should go from whatever is cut, maybe with Dr. Adler before the vote, but a lot of these things were, efficiency driven, right? We can debate whether any programs were cut, but, how it's going to impact the function of the school. But, and if you look at the rest of them in the presentation, the average was 4%, right, increases in the budget. Even though, and I also think the inflation, it's an interesting thing, right? It's like the consumption basket is different for different people and different organizations, right? If I don't travel, I don't pay for gas, and all that. So, of course, I understand it, and maybe that's where we need to get on the process, right? I'm also not a big fan of hearing, and I think Board of Education did a tremendous job on a bunch of things, but hearing, let's take $1 million off, let's get to lower, I'm also a taxpayer, I get it, maybe I would behave the same way, but I think a budget is an outcome of a program and process.
Yeah, but
and I think they get it, and I think they focused on the process, and they want to understand that process, and then I have some suggestions of how I would get it.
Can we just put
Yeah.
the process?
Sure.
I think that I want to come back to that point. And I had 3 comments I wanted to make as well about what's sort of in the budget, and I guess one of the concerns that I have, and this is really true of anything that's growing. So special ed, is one you just talked about, but there are other aspects of this. To me, if our budget is increasing or staffing is increasing, and so is enrollment, well, then I understand why it's increasing.
Yeah.
But we, having been part of this process for, a good number of years, we've seen the enrollment numbers are generally pretty static, and yet we seem to constantly be adding head count and costs, and in some cases, the rate of increase in these areas is significant. And I guess just my concern as someone who thinks or tries to think more long term, it would be good for the board and the administration to kind of think in 10-year terms. And Jack Davis has said this before in talking about adding headcount, when we're adding this, you really have to think about it as the sort of full-on cost. And that's certainly a way to make sort of something sound like a bigger number. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but if you can project, it's like sending your kids to college. It's coming and there's going to be a cost. And if you wait until they're going to say, how am I going to pay for this, you sort of have a problem. And so these are things that we can look at the trends. I just think there's more of an effort should be made to sort of forecast forward. We do this for enrollment projections. We do this when we talk about planning for new capital projects. We should be able to do it, when it comes to some of these expense drivers. And I think the other thing that I've raised this, many times, I would certainly like to see, and I don't know if this is the administration or the Board of Ed itself, but we should be able to do more for revenue other than charge admission to games. And I just think, I think about where I grew up in Texas and Florida, and every high school has all kinds of banners around the field, and maybe some of it's sort of tacky, but there's a lot of people in this town that donate a lot of money for a lot of things, whether that's the library, the Darien Athletic Foundation, a lot of things. Like, I'm not sure why we take money for fields and then don't take money for other things. And maybe that's now under the consideration for improvements to the audiovisual equipment, things like that. But I certainly like to see people trying to find money other than just the taxpayers.
I think, if I can,
Yeah.
to your point on the 10-year projection, I think there was a discussion, whether it was Mr. Deneen or Mr. Sine saying some of these big budget items, we will do a 5-year starting next year. Did I hear it right? I don't know if
I think that's right.
right, yeah, so they realized they want to see the similar thing. You know.
I've always thought they could charge more for parking at the high school.
Exactly.
Because the demand is there.
You mean for events or for?
For
No,
kids.
For kids parking.
Is it
Yeah.
free now? It's free.
Yeah, I don't know.
No.
No.
Oh, it's not free.
I don't know.
No, it's definitely
Not
not
there
free.
But it's always full.
It's always
Yeah.
full.
Yeah.
I got you.
And the juniors all park on my street.
Yeah, it's only for the seniors.
Anyone else on what's in the budget before we
I
start the
just wanted,
process?
to Peter's point about what they cut and affecting the education, the Board of Ed said many, many times in this that they didn't want student-facing cuts, right? But I wonder the implications of when they cut these secretaries,
Yes.
the support that those secretaries offered, particularly the science one, offered the teachers, and what the teachers are gonna end up doing secretarial work or, you know, copying or whatever that sort of support would require themselves, which just takes time away from students.
And that was a point that I was concerned about too, because when you listen to people talk about it that were not on the board, some of the teachers and everything, they were saying, this isn't secretarial work. I walked out of that meeting thinking that it was really a misnomer. People have an idea of what secretarial work is.
It's just a title.
It's a title,
It's
but
old-fashioned.
actually they were much more like
Very old-fashioned.
administrative assistants or
They prepared
teaching assist-
materials, they did all sorts of things.
Yeah, they did all kinds of things, and I think that was an easy place to cut because it had the word secretary, which was a misnomer. And I was sorry about that. And I really think that that's one of the areas that should come back or should be reevaluated next year, whether or not those cuts were the right thing to do at the right time. So that was a concern. I'm glad you brought it up, in because I was going to bring it up.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a thing that we don't know the result, like will it affect some of the teachers' efficiencies in the classroom?
Right. And they're not part of any negotiating unit, and they don't in any place that I know of do a presentation of what in fact they actually do. So I felt that was a bit of an unknown.
But don't you, but I guess like I kind of think this is where you have to trust the people that are running the day-to-day. I mean, you know, the challenge, and I don't mean to move it slightly into process, but the challenge with like the ad cut process is it's people who are a step or so removed, or more than one
Yes.
step, saying, well, what about this, what about this? In this case, like, there was quite an iterative process, and so I mean, I take the concern, but, I mean, it would seem to me that they're, I don't want to say choosing the
Maybe it was
least
the
worst
place
option.
that it was less painful to
Yeah,
cut in
yeah.
the budget.
Yes.
It's a result of, as much as Duke doesn't want to call it, that the administration was against the wall and they had to come with a number.
Yeah.
And they had to make tough decisions, and maybe that was the least painful.
Yeah.
Obviously not for the persons that are losing their jobs, but for the budget process and for the impact of the kids and how to maintain as high a quality education as we have with the least is the impact on the process, right? So maybe that's why.
I think it,
And I think, again, we go back to the process, you know, it's a process thing where they're giving them a number and you have to cut it, which I agree with Curtis, should not be that way. And to me, it's extremely myopic.
And arbitrary.
Totally.
Curtis, what happened with, and maybe I missed it, but I don't think it got added in terms of student facing.
Sorry, what happened with what?
The student facing, the paraprofessional at Oxbridge, did that get added in?
Yes, yes,
Yeah, it did,
yeah.
okay,
Sarah got it.
okay, good.
And I totally agree with you that top-down doesn't work and these words matter, right? Because we're not sort of hung up on them. But I do think that they try to approach it logically. right? No,
Yeah.
not to defend them, right? They said, listen, you propose something, because we think you gotta go lower, you know, but we don't know the operations as well. So, but I think if efficiency is one of the organization's goals, then you have to set up the organization that way, right? I know they have a committee on communication, policy, and all that. They need to have some kind of, you know, I would suggest they have a committee on operations, or, you know, somebody who understands not only how to negotiate you know, the contracts with the, you know, with the transportation, but also actually on the inner workings, right? What exactly missing teacher or paraprofessional in the classroom mean, and how does it flow through the whole organization? I mean, you know, maybe one suggestion would be for these discussions of the board, maybe it'd be helpful to have a teacher sitting there. I mean, I know Sarah Parent was a teacher, and Dr. Ellis was sort of representing how it works, but he's an administrator as well. He cannot know all this.
I think it's tough to put a teacher in that
Yeah,
position.
it is. I agree.
I mean, just because, like, you know, that's their ball. I mean, obviously people can give comments, and the union
some have, right?
president has spoken
Yeah.
on behalf of issues where,
Right.
you know, the membership base had,
Right.
you know, strong views, and I think there are a lot of people that have been former educators in RTM.
Yeah.
Some people on this
Right.
committee, right?
And also, I think that, I understand your thinking, but to have a teacher sitting on there, that what the teachers do in the elementary school and what they do in teaching French 5 are so different that you couldn't really, there's not a real overlap in many ways.
I think you do have to trust the administration
I
to
agree.
look at that sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
We're sort of now into process, which I think is fine, but did you want to, you had questions before, or comments before that I kind of held you off on because we were having this
Yeah.
discussion on content, so.
Right. So in the process, I mean, you know, I gotta sort of applaud the generosity of the Board of Education, right, with their time, with their hard work, with public comment. You know, I know Carolina wasn't happy in one of these meetings. You know.
I'm not happy in a lot of them.
Right. But, you know, I mean, we're privileged to live in a town where, you know, Board of Education responds to you, right? I have a friend who is in a district, he's got 100,000 kids there. He has no way to influence anything. So these people care, they are our neighbors, right? And I think, you know, I think our role is a little different, right? Our role is more about clarifying than advocating, at least the way I view it, and reporting to the taxpayer.
And
But,
by the way, I comment as a parent.
of course, 100%,
I'm not
and I would...
commenting as anybody sitting here.
And I would urge,
saying,
and I would urge,
yeah.
100%, and I would urge the public, obviously, to participate, because I think that does make a difference. Now, you know, the pluses that I saw this year versus what I didn't see before, which I liked, was, you know, Dr. Elu may not like this, but sort of focus on, we'll give you what you need, come back to us if you need other stuff, like the budget control, right? I know the curriculum development, R&D stay there, but, you know, I think Board of Education build good relationship with Board of Finance, and if there is a break in class, the administration should come back, rather than to have some kind of arbitrary $500,000 number there as every year. I like that. I like the 5-year planning, if everybody recalls the same thing, that they actually will step up for it. And I also liked, you know, budget is outcome of a policy, right? So there were a bunch of policy questions, and I like the way they sort of said, all right, this is too big of a topic for us. For example, department chairs teaching. For example, you know, teachers college, but let's table it, let's set up over summer, I assume, you know, process where we want to review it. There was something from Mr. Brown that he was very focused on, something from Ms. Loveland. I thought they did a great job. So that's, you know, I think that's the pluses of it. Now, the issues that I saw, that I mentioned, is sort of the top-down approach, which I, you know, which I didn't appreciate too much. But
You mean, sorry, top-down approach, meaning the.
well, to you know, listen, we need to get to lower number, and I understand why, you know, and I think they give themselves flexibility to come back if some of these suggestions don't work, some of these so-called cuts, right? There's cuts to the budget, which necessarily doesn't mean cuts to the program because they were added to the budget, but and you know, I'm totally with you. I know somebody mentioned there was 30 net new employees over the last 6 years, right, added. But, you know, and we have the same amount of students. The same people who are telling us, though, also voted for these 32 people. And maybe I would vote the same thing, so it's not a reflection on the people, but
But that's the point on
Some of
sort of the incrementalism versus,
Right.
you know, long-term planning. It's
Right.
like you sort of, doesn't sound so significant when you're looking at it a little bit at a time,
Right.
which is,
But then again, right, we added some additional services, the security, the mental health. Now, so that's sort of my comment on the process.
yeah, well, again, I, just on that, yeah, we added things and, you know, sometimes we cut things, but that's, that to me, I think is a discussion that oftentimes doesn't happen with a government in the way it happens with your household. And when, you know, you're thinking about, do I need this or do I prefer that? I can't afford everything. I think that's, you know, the point on the adding cost. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with adding security or a mental health director or sort of something else, but then it's a different, to me, it's a different analysis if I don't know, maybe somebody said that this year, like everything can't be a priority. And the whole capital budget process, I think, is very helpful because they talk about things that are over a long-term basis, and they talk about things that these are very important, these are, you know, level 2, these are level 3. And it doesn't mean we don't do a level 3 thing now, it doesn't mean it never happens. I personally just find that a very useful way to kind of assess all the things that the administration is asking for. And maybe we don't really do that with an operating budget because it's so, I don't know, it doesn't lend itself to that, but I think in some respects it would be, and maybe you can't forecast like the in the same way, but I don't know.
I think that last point you made is key, the ability to forecast 5 years out. 5 years ago, I don't think we would have seen ourselves in a position where we're hiring a director of mental health. And that some of these things have come upon us, and happens in education at every level, that things will come upon us. I'm not even thinking about COVID. But certainly the security issues that we're facing now, a decade ago we didn't face. So I think that we have to be aware of the fact that it's harder to plan, I think, for a long-range program in this kind of field than it is in some others, because it's just, I think these things that are popping up now are unpredictable. And if we had done a 5-year plan 5 years ago, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah, that's fair, but the I guess I would just sort of be saying, well, so if we're adding these things, you know, maybe something has to be cut someplace else. And I think the way that, I mean, that's effectively what the board has done and
Right.
said, you know, this is too much of an increase, so you've got to cut these things, and just, I don't know, the top-down process. I think it's, my only experience with budgets is like at a private company, and that's obviously, it's a more iterative and it's not in public, so it's a different way of getting to where you need to be. I think because these meetings are in public and there's this, I don't know, it's maybe not the most efficient way to do it, but it's the system that we're stuck with.
But there's also an anchoring, back to Peter's point about the top down, there's anchoring to a 2 to 3% number that I've witnessed just in my 10 years here, which I think is completely arbitrary. Number one, it doesn't account for what I mentioned before, which is the cost of living. And number two, I agree with everything you just said about the difficulty of forecasting. Forget education. It's difficult to forecast anything now. Changes in technology, changing in consumer trends and job trends. It's just impossible to forecast like that. But where it breaks down in my mind is this whole idea of, great, we know you put all this work in for all these programs you think you need, just now ask for less. It's just so arbitrary in my opinion.
Well, when you say 2 to 3%, it's 3.56. I don't recall what it's been, but like it's been around 3.
It had a 3
Yeah, but
number.
the arbitrary number is like, it should be 2. That came from the Board of Finance.
Oh, it's,
But sorry, but it's either, well, I mean, I'm not trying to defend anyone, but either it should be 2 or it should be less.
Yeah.
And that person who says that is criticized either way. Right, so what should it be? Should it be either it is an arbitrary number, or it's not an arbitrary number, but whatever number you put out, I'm gonna tell you it should be less? Like what is the way to convey that number without it being, I mean, what's the way to do it? It can't be arbitrary, or it can't be something that's just qualitative, like it should be less. How do you then convey?
Those are
I
both
want it to be
But the
arbitrary.
thing is that the objective
But what's
of
the, sorry, but
Yeah.
like, this is hypothetical, but how do you then convey what someone on the Board of Finance or RTM thinks it should be?
An analogy would be, you ask your child to go research all the college costs that they may have to pay. And they do a full evaluation and come back with a full report, and they said it's gonna cost $47,000 a year minimum for me to go to one of the colleges I can get into. And the parents say, make it 35. It's arbitrary, and it's not helpful.
Let's stick to this example, because I mean, what should it be? I mean, I personally have a view on what the budget increase should be, and it's tied to, in my head, what I wanna pay in additional property taxes, because I know it doesn't work this way.
No,
No, but I think of it as sort of one for one. If I didn't have to pay more for this budget, I wouldn't really care what it costs. But since I have to pay for it, I kind of think of it as a taxpayer having to pay more money for my property taxes. Is this a good investment or not?
Well, the issue
That's-
is
I don't know
the
if that's-
objective of the administration is to provide the best education they can to our kids, period, end of the story. It's not to present a budget that grows by 2%.
No, but.
And
Must be
what-
price takers, I would, right?
obviously,
Like,
one thing,
so
yeah.
that's where the discussion, the debate followed. Now, I agree, 2% is an arbitrary number, it's,
Has it ever been 2%?
I don't know.
no,
but
the point is, any
idea that
number
there's
is an
a number,
arbitrary number.
That's
But so
fair.
what
I
should,
disagree.
so.
No,
sorry,
by
but can I-
definition, any number that you tell them is an arbitrary
But so
number,
what
it's not based on facts.
But,
It's not based on,
But
But I-
this
realities
is
of the
facts.
budget.
but this
It
is.
costs this, it costs that. it
Yeah,
costs
so
that,
for
it
someone to
costs
say, I don't wanna spend this much money, I want it to be less.
We have a
And
right
then
to
someone
do that
says,
as a
how
town.
much less?
Right.
And so someone says, it should be $1 million less, or it should be 5% less, or, I mean, I'm just not
I would
sure.
be more comfortable with objections that are based on, we can't afford this. But when we just spent net $85 million in an island, for us to be pushing for 3% instead of what the board of the school district, the administration did not ask for a 10% increase.
But that's just as
No,
arbitrary.
the point is they didn't ask for one that is double-digit crazy ahead of inflation. They didn't do that. They came back with a number that's below inflation, and for some reason, the Board of Finance determined that's still too high. Strikes me as arbitrary. Based on what is it too high?
So if I may, I think the Board of Education rule is to deliver best education or fulfill the mission in a fiscally responsible manner, right? So it's not only to deliver best possible education.
I didn't say
But-
for
but-
that,
but
that's
I-
the administration.
But I totally agree that I'm also, this is small town politics in a way, right? Which is so
Yes.
interesting, these interplay between different, I'm still learning it, right? 4 years in, I'm still learning, because I totally agree with you that really, the way I would imagine this works is Board of Finance tells us the net worth of this town, right? Measured by grand list, because of worth of our houses, because they don't have income data. We grew 4% last year. Or maybe you don't do it on an annual basis, but over the last 5 years, on average, we grew 3.5%. Therefore, in order to, without increasing further burden on a taxpayer, we can only increase it 3.5, unless there's these extra. So then, they would give this charge to Board of Education and Administration. Administration would fulfill that. So I don't like also the judgments, so that the judgments that Board of Education makes on what's acceptable or not. I'm learning this. They are taxpayers. They are our neighbors, right? But I think their charge should be a little different. It's fiscally responsible. But if the Board of Finance is accountable before, don't come at 3, right? Or vice versa, right?
Peter,
Vice
I
versa.
think that's I absolutely agree that I think would be a better process for the Board of Finance to start with, this is where it should come out, and then the Board of Education and is maybe reallocating some of the program dollars based on, against what the superintendent wants, or maybe they're saying, well, we want to do more things, and so in order to do these things, we're gonna get some money from the revenue side, but I think it would be a lot smoother the administration and the Board of Ed knew what the bogey was, as opposed to having to guess. And I think what we kind of end up with is, I don't know, it's a little.
And here's one more wrinkle that you know, and I'm sort of talking for us because where we sit, maybe I would look at it differently if I was sitting on these boards, but the way I would hope that it works is that Board of Finance says you can afford 3, Board of Education says we need 5, right, to fulfill our mission. It'd be great if they can come to us and we say do 4. But that's not how it works, right?
Yeah.
Our rules are, we can say 0, so after these hours of deliberations, our options are 0, say reject this thing, or basically go along with what is proposed to us and whatever Board of Finance decides, right? But that's a different step, you know, and I know changing the bylaws of the town is tricky, but, you know, maybe I would, and also do I want the power in 100 people, which is somehow unwieldy, these discussions, right? Or do I want it in dedicated 5, 7, 9, you know, person groups who spend all their time? I mean, these people are incredibly dedicated public servants, right? You know, I spend an hour on it, they spend 10 hours on it, and all these things. So maybe that this last step is not necessary, but I, you know, I'm still struggling really what is acceptable or not for the Board of
I
Education.
think there's one more factor, one more group that has input, and that's the F&B committee of the RTM, because they will start in their mind, or not everyone's mind, but they come up with an idea of what they think the percentage increase should be for both the selectmen's budget and the Board of Ed budget, which may or may not be exactly what the Board of Finance thinks. So I think there's 3 different groups thinking about the education budget at the same time. And those 3 groups are thinking about the Board of Education budget in different ways. And I think that that's where we are right now. I don't know what F&B is saying right now, but we know what the Board of Finance is thinking, and we know what the Board of Ed is thinking, and we're getting a sense of what we're thinking. But
Actually, I'm not sure we know what Board of Finance is.
No,
The public
no,
meeting
we
is
don't.
on Wednesday night.
Tomorrow, right? Or
Right.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, tomorrow night, right.
No, it's I thought it was Wednesday.
Oh, Wednesday. Yeah, you know.
Has the RTM in recent history not approved the Board of Ed budget?
Right.
Has that not?
No, I think maybe was there maybe a capital item that was not
There was,
approved?
well, we can cut.
I'm just curious what happened in real practice, if it's happened recently, like what, you know, I'm just curious, not
Not in the
that I
time that
have.
I was.
No,
Well, Janet, you've been on longer than anybody. Did you remember that ever happening?
One time, one slide would be removed.
Well, I'm sorry, Janet, I can't hear you.
No, it has never happened. There was a long discussion about taking one particular program out that the first selectman didn't like. And there was a lot of conversation about it, but it didn't come out.
But I do want to say that Board of Education is focused on these things, right? You know,
Right.
I mean, they want efficiency, they don't want, and they realize it's $85 million thing, you know, and you know, and I know it was a big discussion during the approval of that purchase was, it cannot hurt our students. So, and by the way, tomorrow I think the Board of Education is meeting, and I know Chairman Dineen wants to talk about the budget process, so maybe he can, you know, he can clarify a couple of these things for us.
Anyone else?
Just want to say, I felt in this process actually really helpless in this current role. Like I really didn't see the material value added from our committee, and I thought that was a real shame. That could just be my experience with it, because I asked questions, like when we submitted questions to the administration about specific programs, you know, the written down answers back, they're fine and good, but there's no logical follow-up for discussion or investigation from it. So it's like, okay, I asked you a question, you gave me an answer, and that's it. I mean, there's no change to, are you going to amend it? Can I offer a suggestion? And secondly, and probably more importantly, I'm not qualified to give any kind of real professional input on what I think makes more sense. As a parent, I can tell you, I've been very vocal about it, I'm very anti-Genius Hour. Very anti it, I think, and I know it's a rounding error against the actual budget, right? It's $15,000. No one will even notice it, but it's the principle of it. You know, I would rather allocate that to other programs that we were, you know, worried about having to, either diminish or just remove entirely. It's simple things like that, but there was never an opportunity to actually address it.
What is
My-
the principle that you?
Can I just address your first point? So I mean, I agree with you. I don't think we were as involved as we had been in the past. And
Right.
I
Do you think that's
that was.
because we created such a stink last year?
No,
or-
I don't know.
What do you think is the-
I think it's largely two things. One, we were virtual. Some of these meetings were virtual. I think the administration has always, and Duke have always been willing to kind of come to our meetings, and whenever they have come to our meetings in person, there is a lot more of a dialogue. From a scheduling standpoint, and this is on me for sort of starting with the schedule, I was out of town sometimes, we scheduled meetings on days where the administration couldn't come. We had things that we had to schedule meetings for, to do votes on, which then we weren't in a position to sort of ask them questions. And so looking at how things key off of that Super Saturday, I would do it differently, look to do it differently next year on the schedule, because I think when the administration has come and we have been in person, it's been a lot more of a productive exchange. And I think with this year, it was a bit of like, well, is this too early to have the meeting? We will have just gotten the book, to then, well, we're kind of having a meeting and we've already kind of discussed all these items. So, and I agree with you. I think the questions can be really helpful when you look at the administration needing to kind of respond to all these different bodies to go to the same, groups that ask maybe the same questions. It's a bit exhausting. So to the extent we can do joint meetings, like I think we did one this year, but I don't know if everybody was happy with how it went, but it's easier on the administration. So that is what I would suggest we do.
I kind of did like that one meeting. I thought that was kind of like the most productive out of all the meetings, the one we have about the
Is
SROs.
that the one you did joint with Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think,
Yeah, it was a little bit true.
if I may, first of all, we're not done, right? We're done when
Yes.
we vote on the
Correct.
budget, right? So
Correct.
I know we
We're
all
not voting
jump like
tonight.
day after the meetings in January, right? But I view our role as clarifying and understanding, not advocating. If I want to advocate for certain programs, I can go to public comment, I can email, I can do all these things, right? The people responsible do offer to come here, right? So we have opportunity to talk to them. So my view on those things is different, Mac, from you, but obviously you have it.
Well,
And the third thing
you're
is,
wrong.
no, you're wrong. And the Genius Hour, right? The Genius Hour, there was one member of the board who has exactly the same opinion as you do, right? Maybe you've talked to her, and I know she brought it up. And it was voted on and it was turned down, right? So it was discussed, I think it was discussed several times, and it was decided that they're gonna give it one more year, right? So, I think it was addressed. I don't think these
It
were
was,
lost,
it was suggested.
right?
I think I just use that more as an example of the process than the actual specific. The budget has a lot more than just a
Right.
Genius Hour, right? I think, because I even spoke on that joint call about it, and I was really pressing. The reason I was pressing was just to see what kind of feedback I can get, and is there an option for me to actually broker any kind of change by the result of this conversation? And the answer was, the decision is made, right? And it just felt that the answers they were giving to me were really more out of courtesy than actually seeking my opinion, which is fine. I mean, at the end of the day, again, I'm not a professional who can give a very informed opinion. But I also don't feel where my role is in this.
Yeah, but sorry, in all, like a little bit cynical, a little bit like reality, but I'm sure really everybody involved in preparing a budget would prefer that we didn't exist. Like the fewer opinions, the better. Like, so in that sense, but.
Fair?
I'd just like to add that I agree with you totally.
On Genius Hour.
Yes, and spoke to many, many, many people, and it was unanimously negatively received. And an awful lot of energy went into something for only 15,000, but everything you've said so nicely.
Well, the response from the administration was, we just launched this, give it time.
And there was confusion about when it started. A lot of people thought it started last year, and it had barely started, but we're waiting for the results. They had met twice. It could have been cut for next year.
I think
Based
the
on
issue is
the
again going back for the plan, right? If we have a plan, if there is a plan that is a 5-year plan or is a 10-year plan, then we have a little bit more visibility into like what are these programs, what are they going to accomplish, why is there a need for Genius Hour, how is this going to work, how is it going to fit with the school, how is it going to progress during the years? Maybe the first year it sucks, but then it needs to evolve and continue and et cetera, et cetera. But if we had a plan and a visibility as opposed to here's Genius Hour, now cut Genius Hour.
Yeah.
Now let's put now the like ASL,
And I think
and it's like, and now let's cut, it's like.
And I think,
Dude.
well, I think the Board of Ed, I think, has pushed that as well. Like, we want to, it's not so much Genius Hour, but some of these other things like, hey, we want to hear about this in advance, don't just sort of pop it on us in the budget. So I think that's one thing, but having been, as I'm sure, you guys have seen this too, there are also times things kind of keep coming up even though it has been decided. Like, add cut on sports, what we pay versus don't pay for parent contributions. The board has talked about this, but I've certainly been in our meetings here where someone will say we should have a policy on this, or we should sort of discuss it. It was discussed last year, but we're discussing it again, and that is our prerogative as members, but
And it will continue to be discussed until there's clarity of what is that. Because in my opinion, truly, there is no enough transparency into what parents are paying for sports, what the clubs are spending, how's it, like, the dive needs to happen.
I thought they did that already.
Oh, no.
But wait, also,
Right, well, I didn't mean to get onto that.
but no,
topic,
but it's gonna always be discussed because the parents are going to change.
And the parents are gonna
And
change,
we're gonna
absolutely,
get in
yes.
older grades where our kids
Yeah.
are going to those sports,
Yeah.
or this committee is going to change. So
Yeah.
we're gonna continually
Yeah.
start to have those conversations.
What I wanted to just ask on sort of, this is as good a time to any, recognizing, we may not necessarily be here next year, but assuming we are, like, okay, we're gonna do this Super Saturday budget discussion, which is always, it's one day or another depending on snow. When is the optimal time to get the administration in front of us to ask questions?
When are we gonna get the book?
Yeah,
I think
we're
right
gonna get the
after,
book,
right after
we're gonna
Super
get the book
Saturday.
like 2
Yeah.
days
After
before.
Super Saturday.
But Super Set, so literally like Monday?
No.
Well, maybe
No.
maybe
that's
maybe
too
a
fast.
week or two to digest.
Yeah, a week. I
Yes,
need
but
a
I
week.
wouldn't push it further back.
Yeah.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
wanna target
Yeah.
the week following Monday, which
Yes.
could, and maybe that's what we did this year, and then that was a Martin Luther King Day.
Yeah.
And so maybe we end up with, well, it's not Monday, that may be a week, we gotta do it on a Wednesday.
Didn't we
Yeah.
send in our questions and then we got our responses? And for me, some of my questions got answered then, and it would have been a waste of my time to bring them up in this group setting with them there. So I think we do need an opportunity to
Maybe-
get rid of the small fish.
That's a fair point, but if we do it, and a lot of us ask questions, and a lot of those questions get answered, then it's almost a little bit,
Why do we need the meeting?
yeah, except, to Meg's point, I think it's very valid, like the
For the
fact,
ones that don't get
I
answered.
need
Well, that's,
I
I mean,
need a
I
week to
think
get
it's
through
good.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too,
Yeah.
I'm just saying some of the little stuff,
Yeah.
I might, this way we can focus on the bigger items.
I hear you, I just think if we do that, we may just end up with a very small number of in-person questions, which is okay, I mean, I'm sure Dr. Agley would be happy to leave, shortly, but,
Well, I'd rather
Whatever
have
you
4
want.
quarters and 100 pennies in terms of like, if we could sit in front and really discuss the stuff that matters, that we're really all
Yeah,
very interested
okay.
in, that would be better, I think.
I
than-
think.
okay.
Yeah.
So we'll ask our questions, we'll get our responses, but then we don't necessarily have, well, whatever, maybe we'll put our,
We're gonna always
we're
have
gonna
something
put
to
our
discuss.
meeting on the calendar, and if they get our small questions answered, then they don't have to answer them in the in-person meeting.
I don't know, and it could be that you take that week while you're digesting, you send your initial questions that came out from, listening to Super Saturday, right? And then you send those, but while you're digesting,
Something else.
and then that's the day where you're proposed, a week
Yeah.
into it, then you're like discussing, oh, by the way, that didn't make the questions, but I still have. all
Well, you'll
the
also get a
questions.
chance to read all the
Yeah.
other committees'
Yeah.
questions, and that might have triggered something else.
Well, so frequently, I think, not just here, but anywhere, the answers just produce more questions. So I think that would be an important reason to meet sooner rather than later with the administration.
Okay.
While we're on topic of next year, and I know we're not done with this year yet, but I hope that we move from mental health and safety to year of academic excellence, where we focus and spend most of our time on new courses, students' achievements, overtime, what do we do to improve grades, test scores, do we have new clubs, do we have new competitions, and all these things that make this district great. You know, but there'll be time for that. Okay.
I don't think it's up to us to measure test scores or that kind of thing, or talk about those kinds of things, because I think that there's...
If we're gonna talk about Genius Hour, we can talk about test scores.
Okay, I still don't understand Genius Hour, so...
That's a whole separate meeting.
We value this district, measure the success of the district on some kind of outcomes, right?
Yes.
And if you look at their strategic plan, they have about 15 different academically driven outcomes that they are proud of. How many kids can code? How many kids can bilingual speak? How many kids can do whatever, right? How many takes advanced calculus, or how many kids can play music, right? All
No,
these
I'm
things.
just saying, I don't think we want to get into test scores.
SAT, I mean, don't we
I
show it on
don't
page
know, I
1?
think like that's,
We page
test
to
scores
page
go
1.
down, people freak out, like I don't know.
I mean,
But there may not even
Time out.
be SATs in another
oh, that's what you mean, okay,
Oh.
I got you, I understand now. But, you know, one of the page 3, right, of every presentation, of superintendent's presentation is, budget presentation is,
Yeah.
you know, the graph of how much money we spend per students and what's our achievement on SAT, right? So, obviously, that's
I'm
for
just saying that whole SAT thing is right now.
going away, right? Yeah, so
Yeah,
different
all
tests,
the
I don't
other-
care, but some kind of academic achievement.
We haven't mentioned the word security officers, which is a huge part of the budget. Where is that process now? Have they all been hired? or-
No, they're being interviewed, as far as I know.
No, don't they
They're some are hired, but not all.
I thought that were all, my friends at homes, they sent a note saying that you can come and meet
Yeah.
our new.
I think in March, there's a sit down with the chief director.
Let's just,
Sorry,
and you
sorry,
can
Martha.
absolutely, we can talk
Sorry.
about this in the context, we're talking about this in the context of the budget, so I
Yes.
just wanna remind us.
Yeah, I mean,
But
Well, I think it's good to know all that money
Absolutely.
has been
100%.
allocated. Have they
Yeah.
been hired? Are they working yet?
I got a note that it's April's the
April
start.
Yeah,
April
April.
7th or something.
Something like
Yeah.
that. They were gonna have a, chat with your new security guard kind of thing.
This is not I'm not gonna talk about it.
And January 24th was a presentation online you can watch with this director of security.
Yes,
Which is pretty good.
I know. I
And
just
he
think
goes through the timeline though, you know,
at this meeting, and that huge amount of money
goes
should
through it,
be
yeah.
mentioned.
Off cycle.
100%.
anyone else?
You.
You can,
Yeah, I'm good.
Come on, you've been here 20 minutes.
Oh, and I was wrong, the public meeting with the Board of Finance is tomorrow, you're right.
Yes,
you're right.
tomorrow, and Board of-
Wednesday is the Board of Ed,
It's Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right, because it's strange, I was like, oh,
because they're gonna be
Special.
there tomorrow night.
that's, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
What did you say, Ann, about tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night is the public hearing, the Board of Finance public hearing on the budgets. And then Wednesday, there will be a Board of Ed meeting, and it's on Wednesday, because I'm sure the Board of Ed people will all be at the public hearing tomorrow night.
okay, if nothing else on this, we'll move on to any other business. Okay, seeing none, is there a motion for adjournment? Jan, second, Peter, all in favor? Unanimous, we're adjourned at 8:33, thank you.